Al Larson, Mayor Schomburg, and representing Northwest County.
Rita Athis, representing City of Chicago.
Jerry Bennett, representing Southwest Cook.
Joe Zabo, CMAP staff.
Carolyn Schofield, representing McHenry County.
Matt Brawley, the mayor of Montgomery, representing Kane and Kendall counties.
Frank Beal, City of Chicago.
John Yonan, representing the MPO Policy Committee here at CMAP.
And Matt Walsh, representing West Cook County.
And on the phone, I know we have some people. Hello,
Rick Reinbold, South Suburban Cook.
welcome, Mayor.
John Noak, representing Will County.
Welcome, Mayor. There's one more. Matt, you look so lonely sitting on the end there.
I feel like third base at a blackjack table. You know, the guy out at the end, like, don't screw up the hand, whatever you do. I'm gonna split nines, and someone's gonna go crazy on me.
Or Cody Parker.
Or Cody Park. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen,
too fresh.
I'll call this meeting to order, and first item on the agenda is the minutes of our previous meeting. I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the November meeting.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of ae. Opposed, vote of no.
Aye.
We do have a busy agenda. We're going to try to get through this as best we can. First item under the agenda is the Executive Director's Report, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The LTA update is in your packets. Also wanted to make you aware that we have finalized our charter for our staff-led diversity and inclusion working group. It's an employee-led advisory group committed to CMAP's organizational values to ensure a high-performing workplace that values diversity and promotes equity and inclusion. It remains a priority for us as an organization to ensure a broad representation of diverse backgrounds and a welcoming environment. And so I'd just like to thank the staff that serve on the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group and all of those that have been instrumental in developing the charter. Also wanted to update the board and most importantly let the public know that we will have a new home for CMAP starting September 1st of 2020. We've signed a 15-year lease with the old post office building, and so starting September 1 of next year, our new home will be 433 West Van Buren. As a public agency, it was really important for us to make sure that we ensured the best value to the public, and that included providing good access for all corners of the region to continue to access us at CMAP and utilize our facilities. So we think it'll be a great fit for the agency. Remains, very accessible and fits in with a key part of our mission here at CMAP in ensuring that we preserve our heritage in old buildings like the great post office. So we'll give both the board and the public periodic updates on our move as things shake out and our new space arrangements over the coming year. Also wanted to make the board aware and the public, for those that hadn't seen the news already, we were saddened to hear of the passing of former Aurora Mayor Tom Weisner. Tom spent 3 terms as a mayor of Aurora and of course was a longtime CMAP board member, just deeply involved in all things civic and regional. Public memorial service will be held for Tom next Monday, January 14th, 11 a.m. at the Paramount Theater in Aurora, and I will be attending. At your place, you should have updates on our dues collections, and it outlines, where we're at within each of your COGs, where we need a little bit of help. We've collected roughly 78% of our annual dues from municipalities, so we're into that final stretch drive. A thanks to everybody who has paid. Deadline for payment is January 31st, and I will be starting my annual road show to meet with the COG directors this year. 2 of my deputies, Jesse Elam. Good time to walk in the room, Jesse. And Stephanie Pfeiffer will be joining me to continue to strengthen the bonds between our staff here at CMAP and the COG directors and COG staff. Also want to make the board aware that at the end of November, I was invited to participate in a territorial review in Hamburg, Germany. The review was led and funded by the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, an international organization made up of 36 countries that works to stimulate economic progress and world trade. I served as one of 3 peer reviewers. The additional cities were Rotterdam from the Netherlands and Gothenburg, Sweden. Given that Hamburg is a freight-centric city, and the fact that the Hamburg region actually spans 4 different states within federal Germany, they really wanted a CMAP perspective. So very informative, met with dozens and dozens of mayors as well as state elected officials, staff, Chamber of Commerce's and others. But I would say that while, certainly we feel sometimes that we're challenged with the structure that we have to function within compared to, what I experienced in Hamburg, we really, really have it good. And they're very impressed with the way that we address regionalism, regional economic growth. And I think it's likely we will see a visit from their executive director sometime later this year. And final item in my report, in December I did join Mayor Emanuel and several of the suburban mayors and other regional transportation leaders in a press conference to call for an increase in the state's motor fuel tax. As the 2050 plan indicates, we face a $24 billion deficit to simply maintain and operate the existing system that we have in the condition that it's in today. And so as the conversations now take place on a capital bill, we believe the worst thing that could happen would be to settle for just another Band-Aid short-term fix that's going to put us back in the situation that we're in today in another 5 years. That, if there's going to be action taken, there has to be the political courage to do this right and come up with a fix that is sustainable for the long term, is equitable, fair, and flexible. And a little bit later in the meeting today, Liz Shue will expand on our principles for transportation funding. And Mr. Chairman, that is my report.
Thanks. First, for the chair, I'd like to recognize Farzan Prang for attending. Thank you. Welcome. And just a quick comment, I think on behalf of the board, the diligence that went into selection of our new site for CMAP going forward. Obviously, we've been very comfortable here from day one, and it's worked out tremendously for us. And there was a key component in the new site was to be located near this building, certainly because of the transportation close by with Union Station. So I think we're all pretty excited about the move that's going to take place. I want to thank Joe and Angela and our consultants for working literally almost a year and a half on making the selection. And we think it's going to be pretty exciting to have a new facility, certainly hope a new energy for staff in this organization going forward, to also have a home for the next, certainly guaranteed for the next 15 years, which
Right.
We've been kind of on edge for the last 5 as to whether or not we would stay here. It's going to be a major move. A lot of work is going to have to go into, obviously, the planning and layout of the new facility to make sure it works efficiently for our staff, and certainly convenient enough for people who use CMAP facilities, which, over the years, we have hosted many meetings from different organizations. So we have really been in a partnership with a lot of the other not-for-profits in the area, along with the various conferences, including the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, which will move with us, I'm assuming,
Yes.
to the new headquarters, which they are currently also coexist with here at CMAP. So again, it continues to be a central location, which is the primary reason for the choice. And again, staff, I believe, really was the major consideration as to where we were going to go. We wanted their input from day one as to being able to make this adjustment. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, and I know staff is going to begin that process very, very soon, knowing now that we have a permanent place.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, this was the staff involved in the site selection. This was their top choice, and so it's really, it makes the choice easy when it is the most cost-effective, best value proposition, as well as the most desirable choice. So,
Besides, I should have mentioned that first, that from a value standpoint, this is
Yeah.
economically one of the better moves. And again, by moving there, we also hope to, with the integrity and the reputation of this organization, encourage, and I'm sure the owners of the old post office were happy to see us come in there as an anchor, along with what, Walgreens now is a.
Walgreens and Ferrara Candy, so we will be the third to be publicly announced. It's my understanding there are others in the works, but, you know, we don't know who our neighbors might be other than Walgreens and Ferrara.
And we've, the floor that we're on, I'm gonna mention about the,
So it's the fourth floor, which is extra special because it contains the old historic postmaster's suite, which the building will renovate to its appropriate historic condition. And we will be using that as our meeting room space. And so there'll be kind of a juxtaposition, right, between a modern a floor and this old, you know, wood paneled historic space. But we're pretty excited about it, the fact that, you know, we're able to get the old suite and use it in a way that displays it to the public.
very good, Joe, thanks. All right, moving on with the agenda, under the section on number 5 on our annual financial report, Jim Savia from, Jim, welcome again. And we know you're gonna cut to the chase, right? Can you hear me?
Thanks, Angela. And thanks for inviting me here to present the annual financial report for the years ended June 30th, 2018 and 2017. Want to thank at this point Joe, Angela, Stan, and the entire staff for all of their assistance throughout the entire audit process. They were very well prepared for us this year, and we were able to meet all of our key audit deadlines. I want to point out a few of the highlights in the annual financial report, as well as the board communication, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Starting with the annual financial report, I'm going to start on page 1, which is the independent auditor's report. The independent auditor's report and then the 2 single audit reports that we issue on pages 48 through 51 are the only items in the annual financial report that we are responsible for as auditors. Management is responsible for the rest of the report, and those responsibilities, both for management and the auditor, are listed out here on page 1. Turning to page 2, up at the very top is the opinion paragraph. Again, this year we issued an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can provide to the agency. And then right below that, we did have a change in accounting principle. We adopted GASB statement number 75, which is accounting and financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions, i.e. retiree health. And what that required us to do is to basically record a liability and recognize expense as the benefits are earned by the employees, as opposed to a pay-as-you-go basis under GASB statement number 45. It also modified a few of the footnote disclosures, as well as the required supplementary information. And there's more information on that adoption and prior period adjustment in note 11 in the footnotes. Turning a few pages forward to the management discussion and analysis, starts on MD&A page 1. This was prepared by Stan. Great overview of the agency's financial position and changes in financial position. It also points out any significant changes or trends that may have occurred throughout the year, including GASB statement number 75. And it presents some 3-year comparative data that you can't find elsewhere in the report. So I tell you every year, if you only want to read one thing in the annual financial report, read the MD&A, because it provides a good overview of the agency's finances. Turning to page 4, actual page 4, not MD&A page 4, we get into the basic financial statements, and this is the statement of net position or your balance sheet. Point out 2 things real quick here. Related to the first related to IMRF, you'll see under long-term assets up at the top of the page, there's actually an IMRF asset, net pension asset now, as opposed to a liability in 2017. So that asset is about $2 million. You can see the prior year liability down under long-term liabilities, about 2/3 of the way down the page in the 2017 column. It was a liability of just under $1 million, so about a $3 million flip from a liability to an asset. So definitely a positive development there. It was a good year for IMRF. And then GASB 75, you'll see there's the total OPEB liability, which is under long-term liabilities as well. about 169,000. Under GASB 45, we actually had an asset of about 115,000. So flip the opposite way of what IMRF did, but much less significant numbers. And then lastly, on page 4, you'll see down at the bottom the net position unrestricted deficit, about 50% less than the prior year. That's due to a good year, good positive change in net position, as well as those changes, positive changes with IMRF. Turning to page 5 is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position, or your income statement. Again, this year it was pretty consistent with prior year. You'll see the operating income and change in net position about 2/3 of the way down the page. Very consistent with the prior year, right around $1 million. Right below that, you'll see that prior period adjustment for GASB 75, which decreased or increased the deficit about $255,000 for that implementation. And then page 6 shows the statement of cash flows. This is basically your cash inflows and outflows by activity. And you'll see about halfway down the page, the net increase in cash and cash equivalents this year was about $370,000 positive increase, from about $3 million to about $3.4 million of cash. Turning to page 34, we're in the required supplementary information now. A couple things I'll point out: the schedule of employer contributions on pages 34 and 35 for IMRF and the state employee retirement system. This basically shows that you're contributing exactly what you should be, what IMRF has asked you to contribute. And you'll see the contribution as a percentage of covered payroll is about 7.6% for 2018. Significant decrease from 2015, where it was about 13.5%. So the both dollar amount and the percentage to covered payroll decreased significantly the past 4 years. Page 35 shows the same info for the state employee retirement system. Again, you're contributing exactly what you should be. The contribution as a percentage of covered payroll, though, is obviously much higher than IMRF. It's about 54%, which is an increase from the prior years, about 45%. And then page 37 shows a little more detail on that positive increase in your net pension asset for IMRF. This shows the total pension liability up at the top, which is the liability that the actuary determines that you owe as of December 31st of each year. Below that is a planned fiduciary net position, which is the assets you have set aside at IMRF to pay for those liabilities. And then the net pension asset or liability is about 2/3 of the way down the page, and you'll see that increase from a liability to an asset of about $2 million. And also right below that, you'll see the funded percentage went from 96% to 107%. And then some similar information on page 38 for the state employee retirement system. Since you participate in their plan, it's considered a cost-sharing plan, so the information's a little bit different format. The very first line, you'll see your proportionate share of that liability at the state. Pretty much the same from year to year, changed just very slightly, increased very slightly. And then right below that is your proportionate share of the net pension liability. That was pretty consistent too, decreased about $10,000. And then you'll see the funded percentage, the very last percentage on this page. You'll see obviously not quite as well funded as IMRF, but it's been consistent right around 33% funded. A few other things I'll point out in the report. Page 40 just shows you a budget versus actual for the income statement. The very next page, page 41, shows a little more detail of your grant activity by grant.
Making sure that all I's are dotted, all T's are crossed. It doesn't always make you popular, but nothing is more critical than making sure that the financials are all on solid footing. And so, my thanks to the team.
Thanks. Jim, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
You guys do a great job for us. Thank you. Moving on. Under the contracts and procurements, Angela?
Good morning, Board. Good morning, Chairman. I'll go through this quickly. We have a long agenda. Seeking approval for 4 procurements. The first one is to enter into a contract with Transmart to facilitate the update of our regional intelligent transportation system. The second one is to enter into a contract with Swartz Engineering to conduct the Northwest Municipal Conference Multimodal Transportation Plan. The third one is to enter into a contract with Ratio Architects to conduct the Matson Streetscape Improvement Plan. And finally, we're looking for a vendor limit increase with a company by the name of TDEC to continue with our outsourced data entry project. That's the that's the company we're using to enter in the Illinois traffic crash reports for IDOT. So I'm seeking board approval for those 4 procurements.
Is there a motion to accept all 4 of those proposals?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, vote of no. The motion carries.
Aye.
And also, I was remiss in, with the audit, that obviously the board accept the audit's presentation this morning. Is there a motion to approve that audit report?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions on that? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye. Opposed, vote of no. The motion carries. Angela, you have anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along, on the committee reports, my report. We had indicated that the, actually I'd asked the executive director to make a recommendation for the CMAP Working Committee membership and meeting schedule. As we recall, there was some conflict with dates and availability of members to serve on that, but I think we've come up with a final recommendation. The board members serving on the new coordinating committee include Frank Beal.
Affect the allocation of funding at either the state or MPO level, and there are no penalties to the MPO if the targets are not met. The region has made significant progress in reducing traffic fatalities and serious injuries through engineering, education, and technology, but the region still faces significant safety challenges, especially because of the recent increase in traffic fatalities. By supporting IDOT's targets, the region will have a unified goal that supports making the roads safer for all users. It also supports many of CMAP's partners' goals, such as the City of Chicago's Vision Zero initiative, the Federal Highways Administration's Towards Zero Deaths, and IDOT's Driving to Zero Fatalities. If you recall, the board and MPO agreed to support the state's targets last year. To support IDOT meeting the safety target, CMAP has taken a number of steps to incorporate highway safety into its planning and programming decisions. For example, there is a safety component evaluation of proposed congestion mitigation and air quality CMAP projects in the new Surface Transportation Program Local Shared Fund projects. CMAP also completed a traffic safety white paper that identified a number of recommendations on how to incorporate highway safety into CMAP's planning activities. CMAP is currently moving forward with a number of the recommendations in this year's work plan. The CMAP Transportation Committee approved staff's recommendation to support IDOT's 2019 safety targets, and the Regional Transportation Operations Coalition reviewed the staff recommendation favorably. Given that the targets are set annually, CMAP can revisit the selection of targets each year. Following the discussion and approval by the CMAP Board and MPO Policy Committee, staff will prepare a memo informing IDOT that the CMAP MPO agrees to support the 2019 statewide safety targets. Thank you.
Any questions on that? And there will be a motion to accept that recommendation. None being, I'll entertain a motion that we recommend or approve of the targets recommended in the report. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? Not all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Got lost in that one, right? All right, moving on. Under the Expressway Vision Update, Jesse? Just comes on.
Yeah.
Get some coffee.
That was quick.
I was expecting it to. Anyway, good morning, Jesse Elam, Deputy Director at CMAP. I'm going to give you an update. I'm going to give you an update on a project that staff here have been working on for about 1.5 years with our partners at IDOT and the Tollway, as well as with the consulting firm. And that project is to reimagine the expressway system in northeastern Illinois. So I'll tell you more this morning about how we came to take on this project and what its goal is, and then spend the lion's share of my time outlining the recommendations in the vision as well as their benefits. Then wrap up with some upcoming dates. As we were working on Onto 2050, we were asked to put a special focus on the needs of the expressway system in the Chicago area. IDOT and the Tollway approached us and offered to jointly fund a study by CMAP, which would take an independent look at needs on the entire expressway system, and then offer recommendations for addressing them that would get hung up on jurisdiction or would get hung up on whose project should be whose. And from the outset, we agreed that we would just focus on the needs on the existing expressway system and not look at proposals for new highways. That's something that we did as part of ON to 2050. So for the purpose of the expressway vision, that was a scoping decision from the outset. And then originally we intended to have this vision done before ON to 2050, and some of you will recall that from a presentation we made previously. And the idea with that was that we would be able to use the vision as source material for ON to 2050, but as it turned out, we were not able to do the financial analysis that we needed to do in the amount of time that we had. And so because of that, we're wrapping up this vision now. And the best way to think of it, I would say, is that it's consistent with ON to 2050, and it just adds more detail on this particular topic of the expressways in northeastern Illinois. So there are three themes in the vision. The first is to modernize the aging system that we have. The expressways carry about a quarter of the traffic in the region, so a lot of people and a lot of commerce depend on them, but parts of it are getting to be in worse shape every year. The second theme is really to make sure that the system that we have works well for everyone, that it serves truckers' needs, that it isn't too much of a barrier to walking around, to getting around by walking and biking, that it serves transit trips, that it has a better safety performance, that it has a better environmental record, and so on. And then the last theme here is to have a system that's financially sustainable. As I'll talk about, our business model for at least part of the expressway system is not financially sustainable, and we need a way out. The first theme is modernizing the system. I'll start with the basics. Most of the expressway system was constructed back in the 50s and 60s, planned even before that, although there were a few additions trickling in the 70s and 80s, and into the 2000s with the south extension of I-355. A lot of it has never been rebuilt, and that's the dark red that you see on this map, even though a lot of the system was also designed for like a 20-year lifespan. So it's well beyond, in a lot of cases, its original expectations. Now, those segments that have not been rebuilt are mostly on the Illinois DOT system, on the IDOT system. But by contrast, a lot of the tollway system is new. And after the central part of the tri-state and the Eden Spur are reconstructed as part of the current tollway capital program, pretty much all of the tollway will have been rebuilt. And the largest major reconstruction that IDOT has undertaken recently, by contrast, is the Dan Ryan that was done in the mid-2000s. So we really have a tale of two systems here. The Illinois tollway is in way better shape than the IDOT expressway system, and this is going to be a recurring theme as part of this presentation. I'll come back to it with a few more numbers as we get to the end of this. So the basic vision of this vision is to rebuild the system over the next 30 years. Some needs are more pressing than others. That's based mostly on how badly pavement and bridges are expected to deteriorate. Projects on those parts of the system where deterioration is happening faster, there's a bigger backlog, would need to happen earlier. And actually, if you study this map carefully, you'll see that there are a lot more projects that need to happen in the early part of this program, the next 10 years or so, than need to happen later. And that really just represents years and years of deferred maintenance of projects that needed to happen but have not happened on the IDOT system. But then even within this need to reconstruct a lot of the system early on, even within that, we have some really high priorities, some short to medium term priorities, things that are at the top of the list. And I would put up there I-80, particularly the section west of I-355 through Joliet. That stretch of roadway has got some parts of pavement that are near failing. We have also some bridges that are in extremely bad shape. Another project that needs to start soon off that list is the Eisenhower, should money become available. But rebuilding an expressway is not like putting a new roof on your house, where once you do it, you basically just have the same roof, only newer. When you rebuild an expressway, it's an opportunity to rethink things, redo things, correct old problems, build everything to new standards, get rid of the things that didn't work so well before. So there are lots of examples of this that we're going through in the vision, but a simple one is reconfiguring all these cloverleaf interchanges that we have all over the system. into a design that uses flyovers, and that's what you see on the right. And the main point of that is to get rid of sections where you have traffic that's trying to exit the expressway at the same time and sharing the same lanes as traffic that's trying to enter the expressway, so to merge across. That is a recipe for vehicle conflicts and crashes. It also reduces the overall capacity of the highway system. Putting in these flyovers allows you to carry more traffic. There are also many places on the system where, in addition to just rebuilding, we need to add some mainline capacity. We need to add some new through lanes. For example, that would be I-355 and I-80 and the Eisenhower and a couple of other places. Those capacity additions are all included in the vision. Another example of modernization on this theme is using reconstruction as an opportunity to install communications and traffic management systems that weren't there before. And here we're using active traffic management to help smooth the flow of traffic following an incident. That's what's illustrated here. The lane control lights on this thing going across the expressway, called a gantry, really let drivers know to get over to the left in response to a stalled vehicle that you see being helped by a patrol over there on the right shoulder. Then the lane controls also open up the left shoulder as temporary capacity, left shoulder flex lane, to let vehicles use that, again, on a temporary basis to let traffic get through. This is basically the system that the tollway is using that has just opened up in the past couple of years on the Jane Addams. And this really, what you see here is what you see as a driver. Beyond this, there's everything on the back end that's needed to make it work. There are lots more cameras on the system feeding images to a traffic management center so that service patrols can be dispatched when they're needed. There's new fiber optic cable to carry all the data from the cameras and everything else. And all this stuff is incredibly important, and we think that making it more widespread on the expressway system in the region is going to have a big positive and cost-efficient impact. Incidents are responsible for a lot of the congestion that we face. It's not just a supply-demand issue with not having enough roadway space. And really being able to manage traffic better through systems like this is a big opportunity on the expressway system. Last thing under modern that I'll mention, CMAP has been advocating for using congestion pricing for, well, a couple of years now. To recap that, congestion pricing is a system where tolls to drive on a highway go up when traffic is heavier, and then they go back down when traffic is lighter. And that can either be done on a fixed schedule, or it can be done in real time, but the point of it is to keep traffic flowing. If prices go up, then some people will decide to do something different, like they'll leave at a different time when it's less congested. They'll take transit, or they'll take a different route. There are a lot of examples of this across the country, generally as separate managed lanes on the expressway, like you see here. That's the illustration. So while we have a tollway in this state, and we have a lot of experience with tolling, using tolls to pay for highways, we have not, as a region or as a state, taken the plunge to use tolling pricing in general to manage traffic, even though that's something that's being done more and more all over the country and internationally. So in this vision, we are recommending both, that we expand tolling to help pay for construction, which I'll talk more about later, and use variable tolling, congestion pricing, to manage demand after that. And I should just remind you, this is all following the lead of the policy lead of On to 2050. Both of these concepts were included in the plan that was approved back in October. So the second main theme of the vision is making sure that the system works well for the different needs of all its users or potential users. So I'll start with the numbers. This is some modeling that we have done as well as our consultants. On the table, vehicle miles traveled is a measure of total driving. That's all the miles traveled by all the vehicles in the region. And by contrast, congested vehicle hours traveled means the amount of time that all vehicles in the region spend driving in stop-and-go conditions, so at a lower speed. It is a measure of congestion as opposed to a measure of overall driving. So in the vision, with the capacity additions that we're recommending, we're proposing to add about 10% more expressway lane miles and to use congestion pricing on the entire system. And what happens then is that overall driving doesn't really change, but more people start taking the expressway and a lot fewer people take the arterials, which are the local streets. They're labeled here as arterials. And we get a big decrease, as you might expect, in congestion on the expressways, but also an improvement on the arterials. So all those people off the system who decided to not take the expressway are also seeing a benefit. And then trucks see a really large relative improvement in congestion. And as I'll come back to later, that comes mostly from tweaking the toll rates to try to encourage trucks to take the expressway rather than the arterials whenever they can. So if we combine new lanes on the expressway system with congestion pricing, then as I just told you, we can make it where we reduce congestion on both the expressway and on the local streets, but we also encourage people to take transit more. And that's the mode share increase that you see on the top line. In fact, this is a really large mode share increase relative to what we've seen in the past and relative to other strategies that we can think of. And all of that comes from more appropriately pricing driving to reflect the actual congestion that people cause by deciding to get on the road when they could be taking transit or an alternative. And there are a lot of other ancillary benefits from doing this, and we're just kind of going through a couple of them. Air quality improves. This might not be obvious, but air quality improves because engines are a lot more efficient when they are not running in stop-and-go traffic. Safety improves. We don't show that line here because we're still finalizing the numbers, but the reason it improves primarily is because you don't have the fender benders that you do in stop-and-go traffic, and because if you're pulling more people off the arterials onto the expressway system is the safest place to be driving. So you have more lane mile, you have more travel on the expressway system. We also finally looked at economic impacts, and as you might guess, reducing congestion and therefore saving time for businesses is good for the economy. And by the time we get to 2050 and everything recommended in the vision is actually built, we'd see an increase in gross regional product of around $30 billion. And gross regional product is a technical name for all the additional economic value that's created by the businesses in the region. And this all translates into about 16,000 new long-term jobs and, of course, a lot more short-term construction jobs, so construction industry jobs. And then finally, the bottom line here, literally the bottom line, is the benefit cost ratio, and that compares the value of the travel time savings, the reduced out-of-pocket costs, wear and tear in your car, the reductions in the cost of shipping freight, and all the benefits that system users get. And then it compares it to the costs that the public sector is putting out to make the roadway improvements. And the ratio has to be at least 1 in order for a project to be worth doing. That's just basic. So the higher the better in general. And what we found is that this has a pretty favorable ratio. It's coming up on a ratio of 5. So I just showed you that the expressway system, expressway vision is good for drivers. It's good for truckers. It's good for all of us in the sense of making air quality and safety better. It's good for transit in the sense that it encourages more transit use through pricing. But to hone in more on transit, we need to specifically support it by building transit elements into the expressway project proposals. But more importantly, I think by providing revenue, having agreements, deals in place to share revenue from tolls to support the parallel transit service that already exists. And just like on the expressway system, the rail, and perhaps worse, the rail transit system has years and years of deferred investment because of lack of capital. We have to address that problem no matter what, but it's going to be especially important if pricing the expressway system encourages more people to then take the transit system. Both On to 2050 and the RTA strategic plan, which was finished just before On to 2050, they placed their primary emphasis on fixing the existing system and making it better. And you can see that in this map of the regionally significant transit projects in On to 2050. Almost all of the rail projects, which are shown in blue here, are rebuilds or improvements to existing lines. So I'll just say, as part of this, that there are many opportunities to stage transit and roadwork construction projects at the same time when they share right-of-way. And the obvious example of this would be something like the opportunity to reconstruct the Forest Park Blue Line, which in bad need of reconstruction. Do that at the same time or as part of the same construction project as the Eisenhower reconstruction. But beyond that, beyond sharing revenue and staging construction right, we can and should more specifically design in roadway elements that support transit. And here's an example of design integration between the expressway system and transit. So one place where it really makes a lot of sense to have more expressway bus service is on I-55, but there are, which already exists, been very popular and successful. There are opportunities to enhance that service even further. For example, by building stations immediately adjacent to I-55 in places where there's a need to transfer to another service. This particular example is Cicero Avenue at I-55. With reconstruction, we have an opportunity to make room under this overpass, which is a kind of unpleasant pedestrian environment right now, and make a potential station that could offer a transit connection or transfer to potential enhanced bus service on Cicero. Again, this is just an illustrative example. This is the kind of stuff that we'll have in the vision. The best place where an actual service like this should be put in place would really be determined by where north-south bus rapid transit winds up. But I'll just say more generally too, the expressways as of now, built to old standards, are very often barriers to walking and biking, and you can really see that in this picture of Cicero. But there are plenty of opportunities as we reconstruct this to make the whole system much more permeable to walking and biking, so that they're more neighborly than they currently are. Other users and how they would specifically benefit, trucking, obvious one, big benefit to the trucking industry from the expressway system, but there's still a lot of things that would help make it work better for truckers and also cut down on the impact of trucking on communities and other vehicles on the expressways. One important thing is to add truck parking. There's a national and regional shortage of safe places to park, and that's really even more of a concern with new hours of service regulations, federal hours of service regulations, which limit the amount of time that drivers can drive. As the tollway shifts, this won't fully solve the problem, but as the tollway shifts towards all electronic tolling, the cash lanes at the toll plazas could be repurposed to provide some of the parking that's needed. And there are also, in addition to that, other places too where trucks could use better access to freight shippers like intermodals, which also means making specific capital improvements to help support that, ramp improvements and some arterial improvements. And then I showed you earlier that that the vision would result in taking truck traffic off of the arterials, and that's because we can tweak the prices to encourage that. It's safer and more efficient for trucks to be traveling on the expressway system when they can. We would also promote overnight travel wherever possible. And you do that through pricing, although we have found through our modeling that the discounts have to be pretty steep. We need to work on that a little bit further. But getting trucks to travel overnight would be a huge benefit to congestion. In terms of congestion, every truck is worth probably 3 or 4 cars. And then finally, a last good way to manage truck traffic that we think deserves more study and won't be fully determined as part of the expressway vision, but should be studied more, is using truck-only lanes in places, again, where it makes sense. That's places that have a high percentage of trucks and that are congested corridors. A big possible benefit of that is being able to segregate truck traffic and therefore improve safety. We think that I-80 could be that corridor, right, for additional work there. The vision calls for increased user fees in the form of tolls to help rebuild the expressway system. And that's a fair and efficient way to pay for it, in the sense that those who benefit from it most also pay for most of it. But that really, I think, butts up against our equity goals that we have in on 2050, which we call inclusive growth. So we need to have, as part of this, a real and significant low-income assistance program where lower income users either get discounts and/or they have a dollar cap on off-peak tolls. And I say off-peak because we want to do this in such a way that we aren't also inhibiting the effectiveness of congestion pricing in the first place. But in general, even beyond that, the vision recommends rethinking our whole approach to toll violation enforcement, which currently means mounting fines for violations that get sent to a debt collection agency and low cost of toll can suddenly become a very, very expensive proposition. That all falls most heavily on lower income users. Instead, we are exploring a model in which we limit pursuit of those violators and instead try to make up lost revenue through annual toll increases. And we can also make that much easier by having very broad access to toll transponders and having cash-only options for lower income users, so that it's as easy as possible to replenish those toll transponders. So I will turn to the last theme in the vision, which is to set us up for a financially sustainable future. The model that we use to build and maintain the IDOT expressways is not financially sustainable. Federal government paid for most of the cost of building them, but has shown no real signs of paying for the cost of rebuilding them. The state has not been able to provide enough funding through the gas tax or motor vehicle registration fees or really anything else to properly maintain them. And this is all despite the fact that these are used very heavily every day and despite all the economic value that they bring to the region. So the average age of the IDOT system at this point is over 40 years. It actually has so many bridges in poor condition that the state is actually incurring federal penalties on that basis. Now, contrast the tollway, it's in great shape. The main difference, money. The tollway has a financially sustainable model, the IDOT expressway system. IDOT expressways do not. And I'll just say by not having the money we need to reconstruct the expressways right now, we're actually costing ourselves more in the long run. So our consultants did this analysis of the investment needs on I-80. If we continue to just patch pavement and do other rehabilitation stuff over 30 years because we don't have enough money to just do the big reconstruction job we need to do. But if we had money available to rebuild I-80 right now, for example, by tolling, we would save ourselves at least $250 million over the long haul because we wouldn't need as much maintenance on the road after we do that big reconstruction up front. So this is just one road. We think that there's a similar story to be told across the expressway system where we have a lot of deferred work that needs to be done that if we do, will save us money over the long term. Now we come to fork in the road. We have estimated at this point that tolling could pay for about 3/4 of the capital and operations and maintenance costs of the projects in the draft expressway vision. And that assumes that tolling would start after a project is done, meaning after the improvements are made. And that's kind of on the theory that it's only justifiable to put a toll in place if people are actually paying for a better travel experience. So that's what we found now. Over the longer term, the whole expressway system can pay for itself with tolls. And I was reminded recently that there is a future beyond 2050. These expressways that we're rebuilding will have lifespans of 50, 60, or more years. And by contrast, concession agreements with the private sector for doing this kind of thing often last 50, 75, sometimes even more years. But still, in the near term, we need a source of capital to jumpstart this whole program at the beginning. We have such a large backlog of deferred maintenance that a pretty large cash contribution is needed in the next couple of years. A state capital program is a pretty obvious place to look. Another idea is to look at it the opposite way and try to make the vision a little bit cheaper, the vision program, without also affecting the revenue coming in. That is a strategy that we're working on still, and one reason why this is not absolutely buttoned up at this point. But I will say that there are limits to value engineering, so we may not be able to take that as far as perhaps we would like. And then lastly, another challenge is the unfunded transit elements in this program. The rail system is in, as I mentioned earlier, basically the same boat, if not a worse boat, a leakier boat as the expressways, and it really needs large investments as well. But if we agree to use toll revenue flexibly, then as the whole program over the longer term becomes revenue positive, as we believe it will, then the tolls can be used to fund continued operation and maintenance of transit, which we think will help keep the expressway system, help keep transit able to complement the new expressway system going long into the future. So let me close by telling you about some upcoming dates. We are obviously talking to our governing boards this month. I'll be doing a similar presentation tomorrow to the MPO Policy Committee. We'll also be meeting with stakeholders about some of the finer details of this vision, and then producing an executive summary of the vision that we expect to have available for perusal in March, to be followed in early summer, late spring, by the full draft of the vision. So I do want to thank you for your attention this morning. We do think that this vision is a reasonable way to move forward with rebuilding a system that we all depend on. It really needs to be rebuilt. I'll take any questions.
Question to Jesse. Certainly, we spent a lot of time in this because I think we've all been reading, especially recently with the changeover in the governorship and General Assembly. The funding and transportation is going to be so critical. I know we're going to talk about it a little bit further ahead. But I think the importance of this agency in providing the information to the public to support those who legislatively are going to have to make the decision as to how funding sources are going to go going forward, I think is critical for us. Sometimes we get caught up in the details of how much and where it's going to come from, but I think this agency not necessarily step back, but can be actually at the forefront of identifying, as we've seen here, to the public, the needs that are out there and details of and plans of how we can go about assisting those who are going to have to make the final decisions in supporting a financial plan to back up, what we believe are going to be sustainable changes in our transportation system throughout the state. And certainly you can see, as we all know here at CMAP, the needs that are out there. And we're hearing it obviously from the RTA. We've had a presentation made by them. But again, I can't emphasize enough that this agency stepped forward in doing our best to inform the public on paper and in vision, and to see actual touchy-feely things of maps and diagrams and visions of how we need to resolve or to solve these types of problems. So I think that is really a major role for us coming up, sooner than later, because I think the General Assembly and the governor are talking this year seriously about a capital plan. So, other questions of Jesse on some of the
Mayor,
details?
one quick question. Jesse, how do other major metropolitan areas handle the tolling issue? Because I think one thing that we're going to have to be able to explain to our constituents and the Chicagoland population is that this is not a unique problem, and that by moving away to Houston or New York or LA, you're still going to be facing the same type of tolling issue. So how do those metropolitan areas handle that?
Well, so there's a couple of different ways to answer that question, I guess. Adding managed lanes and building new toll roads has become more prevalent all over the country. I think what's a little bit different here is that we're talking about using tolls to pay for the reconstruction of a previously free road. So that's happened to a much lesser degree, and that's partly just because of the way some restrictions on the way the federal government allows that to happen. But also that conversation nationally is still ongoing. But I will say that there are several places where it is happening. I-5 in the Portland metro area between Oregon and Washington State. Rhode Island is doing some things right now. There are a couple of other places where this discussion is definitely going on to use tolls to help pay for an improved expressway system.
A good question, Matt, and that's really the crux or the core of information that the public needs to make decisions on or support. True, you look at Florida today, the Florida expressway system is almost solely becoming all tolls. And when I talk to people, I said, look, the reality is, number one, I think people believe that when transportation dollars, it's the cleanest taxes, if you want to call it that can come forward where money's collected, go to roads, period. Nothing else in that. Skimmed off. But the point being, as I've told people, look, there's going to be a choice here. Maybe he's talking about the controversy that came up about 30-cent gasoline tax. We have two choices here. It's either going to be a foundation of fees or taxes as they exist now, or we are going to get into all of our state highways are going to be tolls. So I guess I don't know how to measure that as an individual who uses the expressway system a lot, to say, is it cheaper for me to support a 30% or 50% gasoline tax, or as we did after 2040, support the tollway system and stood behind them when they went to the public and said, look, if you want a first-class system, we're gonna have to raise these tolls by 50 cents or I think whatever it was. And you know what? I remember back then, everybody went nuts, but it is one of the best systems in this state. It is, and it's got a plan going forward as to continue to improve and maintain that system with that 50-cent increase. So, again, I think it's our obligation to do our best to inform the public.
But, Joe, real quick, I mean, obviously, Mayor, as we've learned in 2050, 30, 40 years from now, 60, 70, 80% of the cars will be non-gas cars, right? So, I mean, we have to model our system for the future, and I think the tolling system is probably the most effective way to do it. I think a lot of it is about how we inform the public and how we message it. And because the reality is, motor fuels tax 10 years from now, it's only going to be going down.
Yeah.
So that's the reality. Either cars will become more efficient or they can go electric. That's what's going to happen.
So it's a critical part of it, and you know, when we were first approached by the tollway chairman and the IDOT secretary, you know, a year and a half ago to embark on this, the whole idea was to show the public what we can have, what a modern system can look like if in fact we properly fund it. And you're right, there's a lot of education, but you have to have that end product, that vision, so they understand what it is that they're getting. You know, the value proposition, what they're getting in exchange for the tolls that they'd be required to pay.
And you know, my daughter lives in Dallas, and I will tell you, they've used the variable tolling, and it really works down there. You know, the congestion is really decreased, and it's been much quicker from one end of the city to the other to get through on the expressway. So that system works.
Yeah, I just think it's important that we explain how it's worked other places and that we're not just trying to tax people for the sake of taxing.
Yep.
I mean, that's always a danger to get buy-in.
Yeah, the challenge is real.
Jesse, thanks. We look forward to further updates. Thank you. Moving on to the 2050 amendment process. Liz, you're going to do that? It's going to be long.
A little bit. There's some meat here. 80 agenda.
Good morning, everyone.
We were just murmuring that you're going to make this to the point quick.
I will do my best. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Liz.
You have a memo in front of you describing the amendment process for regionally significant projects. I will cover this memo quickly, and then we do actually have 2 proposed amendments that staff are working on, so I'll give you a little bit of information about the timelines for those memos and when you should expect to see more information. So first and foremost, we do encourage everyone to propose new projects during the plan amendment or during the plan development process. That said, sometimes new revenues become available. Sometimes projects advance very quickly through project development. And so we have laid out the amendment process to facilitate that. Generally, as a quick reminder, regionally significant projects were defined in the plan development process. Any project that costs more than $250 million is an RSP. And then projects that are between $100 million and $250 million and either change capacity on the national highway system or increase bus or rail transit capacity are regionally significant projects. If they are not on the fiscally constrained list of the plan, they would have to come back for an amendment. Page 2 summarizes the process that staff will undergo and the 2 main arcs of analysis that we will pursue. So there is a quantitative evaluation that looks at impacts on the transportation network today and in 2050, as well as tries to quantify planning priorities and how a project might affect those, such as conservation areas, commutes of economically disconnected workers, and similar factors. Staff will also put together a qualitative evaluation where we assess fit with the plan's priorities and goals and its principles. And so this process helps outline how CMAP will work with project implementers to get the information necessary in order to put together those 2 parts of the evaluation. We do ask for quite a lot of information. I'm not going to go through that in detail today, but page 3 covers what we are looking for from implementers. We ask that they use our forecasts, and if they do not, for example, we would ask that CMAP concur with their methods. and that they use our forecast for at least a single analysis. We request information on the travel demand modeling, the environmental evaluation, and other evaluations that they are using to support the project's addition or amendment into the plan. And then finally, any project must be fiscally constrained to be added to the plan. So we ask for information on project revenues, project financing, and if a P3 is in place, any information there. And then the final part of the document walks through the potential timeline for amendments. There are two separate processes outlined. They are not that different in time, just a couple of months. But the arterial process is separate in part in response to concerns that were expressed when we expanded as part of On2 2050 the set of projects that we were evaluating to arterials. We are providing a consistent, slightly streamlined process where we ask implementers to come to us with those proposed amendments once a year all at once, and we will review those together. The process has just 3 phases: data and information gathering for implementers who are seeking to perhaps pursue a faster amendment. This is a place to save time, but this is also the point at which CMAP and the implementer set up the schedule, discuss initial fit with the plan, and similar topics. The second phase is evaluation of the project. That's simply the staff completing the work that I talked about earlier. And then finally, the third phase is public comment and amendment. RSP amendments are amendments to the plan overall, so they must go out for public comment. Any amendment would be out for 30 days of public comment. Prior to that, and for public discussion, staff will produce a memo outlining our analysis of the project, our understanding of it to date, and its fit with the plan. Following public comment, staff will produce a recommendations memo and bring that eventually to the board and MPO for discussion and for a vote. I did note that we have 2 upcoming amendment proposals. In November, we received both of those from the City of Chicago. The first is for the O'Hare Express system, and that is a partnership between the City of Chicago and the Chicago Infrastructure Trust. And the second amendment request is the Jackson Park Mobility and Transportation Improvements. And so staff are working on the 2 of those together and moving those forward together. We anticipate the memos being available for public comment from January 25th to February 25th. There will actually be an earlier version of those memos discussed at the next Transportation Committee meeting on January 18th. We will provide to the board and the MPO for their March meetings a week in advance a staff recommendation memo based on any further analysis, that public comment, and all the information we've gathered, and ask you to vote on those 2 amendments at your March meeting. So, any questions?
Any questions on the amendment process? I'm going to roll into...
Yes. So you also received in your packet a 1-pager on principles for sustainable transportation funding. This mirrors a similar document that was produced after GO2 2040. It really distills the revenue recommendations of the plan and helps us engage in conversations with legislators and the many organizations that are talking about transportation funding in the state and the region today. This also builds on work from all of you. So several of you participated in a subcommittee of the board and MPO that focused on transportation revenues in the region in early 2018, and that subcommittee provided a report to the board in June that actually contained the bones of these principles. So again, this is really building on the work that staff and the board and MPO conducted throughout the planning process and distilling the transportation funding principles as we move forward into a time when the governor, the state legislators, and many others are discussing transportation funding. They build on the concept that transportation is a huge economic asset for the CMAP region and the state of Illinois, but at the same time, we have not been consistently investing in our transportation system. The plan highlighted a gap just to operate and maintain the system through 2050, and you discussed some of those issues already earlier today. We have 4 principles that we are proposing and asking for your approval on, again, building on prior work. And the first is sustainable, and this focuses on the need for a long-term solution. So we're not returning in 3 or 4 or 5 years asking for new transportation revenues. We can do this by increasing the revenues that we have, diversifying our transportation revenue sources and indexing any existing or new sources to inflation so that our revenues can grow as costs increase over time. The second principle is fair, and this really builds on the need for user fees that charge those who get the most benefit or the most use out of the system for that benefit and for that use. We do highlight that current fees, taxes, may not be the best fit for modern ways of getting around and for modern or more fuel-efficient vehicles. So we may need to transition to new revenue sources over time. The plan specifically highlights a road usage charge, and this is something that would have to be pursued after a series of pilot studies. The next principle is equitable. When we think about increasing transportation fees, fines, fares, taxes, we do have the potential to have disparate and negative impacts on low-income populations. So we want to ensure that any new revenues provide options to reduce the impacts on these residents. And then the final principle is flexible. And this is not about new revenues, but really about how we use those new revenues. So pursuing performance-based funding, implementing a multimodal system, and pursuing projects that have regional benefits, not just very localized benefits. So these are the 4 principles that we are asking for your approval on today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Liz, the only question I have is on the equitable. I mean, the tollway now, they're in their, 4th year of the expansion and rehab of the system. The controversy back then too was how equitable it was in raising those tolls. Is there any information we can glean or gain from the tollway? Have they ever done a study themselves as the impact of increasing those tolls on low-income people?
Not that I know of. This is a topic that CMAP staff are beginning to look at and try to identify across different revenue sources ways to either through the tax structure, through special programs such as special transponders and other options, allow the opportunity to reduce these impacts.
Again, to answer the question was now
Yeah.
brought up by Jesse, and that recommendation is that we do have some history here, and I don't know how else, going forward, especially if we're going to promote the idea of tolling on interstates, to have some base analysis or at least some study or history, if it's possible, of what's really already taken place.
Yeah, and the key is there's not a lot out there, but it's fundamental. It's got to be part and parcel. Obviously, we believe that user fees have to grow, have to be, a significant part of how the system gets funded. But with that, we have to make sure that there isn't this undue burden placed on our most needy and most vulnerable citizens. And so it's just got to be a part of the equation.
And I do want to emphasize that's an item that's in our work plan for this year. Staff recognizes that it's an issue, and we're developing information for that. So we can bring that back to you.
One of the things that was brought up in Jesse's presentation was having it with low income using off peak hours. The problem with that is most lower income people are working at minimum wage jobs, which you don't have the choice of saying, okay.
Mayor, actually, that was for trucking. On the
was that
off-peak
just trucking?
hours. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
reduced rate for trucking to incentivize.
But it was brought in at the low
Yeah,
income.
I'm sorry
too,
there was
so-
confusion on that, but no, that was to incentivize more overnight use of the system by trucks when there's excess capacity available.
Although, Mayor, you're not far off, because I remember the tollway when I sat through two or three presentations in answering the public's questions about the possibility of some type of credit or something for low-income families. And I think a point was brought up, well, maybe, they're working all nighttime jobs. So therefore, they should maybe just be able to benefit on a nighttime toll. But that was brought up. But again, it's a tough measurement unless you're out there. I don't know how you can actively find out who is no longer taking that tollway because of cost. So there's some study that's going to be involved there.
Right, and we are also going to look at other programs that exist nationwide, how other
Yes.
regions are dealing with this.
Yes.
The key is, it comes back to a point that's, focused on in the plan, and Jesse touched on in his presentation on the full vision. We have to ensure the system works for all users, and so we have to make sure that the considerations are in place, that no undue burden is placed on those with the greatest need.
I'll entertain a motion, we accept the, I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
On this item, go back to the, jump to this.
Well, we rolled into the next. item.
Rolled it, okay, it wasn't a jump, it was rolled.
Frank, you can go back, no problem.
Okay, go ahead with your,
Well, the motion here would be to accept the recommendation on the principles of sustainability. Is there a motion? Moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Frank?
on the amendment process, I'm delighted to see even some thought to the process. Because coming up with the plan was a thorough, sustained, analytical effort, not without controversy itself, in terms of 53, in terms of the red line and other projects in or out of a constrained budget. So if we're being asked to amend the process, it really requires some very thoughtful work in the process. But I have two questions about it. One of which is, I assume that if a project is added, something gets subtracted because you got a constrained budget.
Not necessarily, it does have to be fiscally constrained, and so the key would be, part of the analysis that staff will do is understanding what additional revenues, if any, the
Depends on the
proposed.
project.
But yeah, ultimately, the bottom line is, I think your fundamental point is appropriate, that the bottom line is the plan has to remain in a constrained position.
Yes.
Even as amendments get made and projects come in or out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no free ride. There's no
And
free ride.
my other question, I assume that sometime in November you got these requests, given the 22-week timetable. Because if you're gonna make the decision in March,
This is an accelerated process.
it's not the 22 weeks.
It's a little bit shorter. The city was very quick in getting the information that we requested to us, and so that allowed some time savings. I believe the exact date that we received the request was November 20th.
So we had intended to come forward with a process for amendments anyway. To your point, obviously, we're big believers in the purity of the process. It's critical when we put the plan together, and so we wanted to ensure an equal level of attention was given to any amendments. And so that was already in the works. And then, of course, the city approaching us with amendments just added a sense of urgency to make sure that that was put into place and properly utilized for all amendments as we go forward.
Yeah, the integrity of the process is really important, because we don't want to go back to a different era where everybody's project was listed as a priority.
Yeah. Yeah, you use the word integrity, purity of process, but yeah, the same thing. That's
absolutely.
right.
Absolutely, so.
Well, we use performance-based in 2040, and however, a couple plans were dropped on us that, that went through us without really a review system that you're calling for here. And I think that's, to answer that question, I think that's what we do need to do going forward, unless they're saying, hey, I'm gonna match 20% of new federal money coming in and, give us a blessing type of thing. But I would think that would have to be a pretty, significant financial input from outside this region, to move something in. Liz, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Gordon, you're on the hot spot here with the legislative update. Yeah, I just mentioned it's gonna be a hot session down there.
Oh, so we can only hope, right? Good morning. I have just a couple of items that I'd like to chat with you about. The first being the legislative framework and state and federal agenda documents, which we will be bringing back to you in February for approval. But today I'm bringing them before you for discussion to see if you have any comments or suggestions or recommendations. But the framework and agenda documents are items that we revise after each plan. And so these documents reflect the 3 principles, the 5 chapters, and the 14 goals for on to 2050. And then we have two separate items, which are the federal agenda and the state agenda, which are more specific and more targeted towards issues that are taking place at the Capitol in Springfield and in Washington, D.C. The state agenda basically covers some of the items that you have seen over the past few months with the adoption of On to 2050. We again are talking about ensuring a reliable access to planning funds. We're also talking about continuing the discussion on performance-based decision-making and accountability. And in advance of a capital program, as previously stated, in the principles, we are now also talking about ensuring the multimodal nature of the funding, and that the state, have a commitment to transit. And so we think that's very important. We also talk about reforming state tax policy, building local capacity, and focusing in on consolidation efforts. We're also talking about an integrated approach to managing water resources and promoting policies that address urban flooding and protecting water supply. That's the part of the state agenda. On the federal side of things, we are talking about, again, improving surface transportation with emphasis on performance-based funding policies and increasing the role of MPOs in those programming decisions. We're also talking about addressing climate change, protecting water and natural resources, facilitating data-driven, transparent investments decisions, and we're also talking about promoting housing options that target assistance to disinvested areas and coordinated planning. And so those are just the high-level agenda items, and I'm just opening it up for your discussion, and I'll be coming back to you for approval in February.
Questions?
Chairman, I have a
Sure,
quick
go ahead.
question. Just, I'm new and
Sure.
would appreciate the clarification. On the federal agenda, there's the position that we're looking to increase the role of MPOs in programming. That is in place of decisions that are made at the federal level currently, right? That's
Correct.
not something that other municipalities is in place of their.
Correct.
Got it. Thanks.
And potentially the state level.
Right.
But it brings it closer down to the ground, yeah.
New governor, starting new General Assembly, what about our, as we've attempted for the last 13, 14 years to get funding for this agency? Any chance of opening up that door with a new administration?
There's always an opportunity.
And that's why I'm asking for it.
We talk about, accessing sustainable revenues for planning. And so that will be part of that discussion. I think my initial interest is in who's seated as the IDOT secretary. I think that will provide us with best opportunity to continue the funding that we're receiving now, although it's not what we would like it to be. It has sustained the agency over the course of the last, since we've been in existence.
And we struggled, and that's been our point down there. And I think if they're gonna take a new approach going forward, new sheriff in town, and hopefully an open-eared General Assembly, but that we can get our feet down there again and ask, look, if you're gonna go with a capital plan, there's some other things, and certainly sustaining a planning agency, MPO for the entire region is important. And I don't think the amount of money that we were asking for is a budget breaker. And a lot of the rancor that went on last year, nothing got done because of the fight that was on. So I'm hoping everybody's got a clear head and take a look at this agency, because I think it's this agency that's gonna, again, support whatever they're gonna do from a revenue, a capital plan going forward, that we can back up, numbers with actual details of what needs to be done and how it could be done. So, again, I ask you when you go down there and if we can assist this board or myself, just let me know, and, we'll be right behind you if there's an opening, at least to get us to pitch this agency.
So I'm going to follow up with the answer to that in my following report, but I know there are other questions about the framework.
Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment on the framework itself, that on page 11, where it says CMAP supports state and federal reforms to enable IDOT, the state police, the tollway, and municipal county agencies to implement automated speed limit enforcement programs. I just don't recall us touching on this area in the past, and maybe it's just my lack of memory, but I just wanted to express concern in particular with trying to go towards VMTs and monitoring the use of systems that wouldn't be abused, and this kind of raises a concern because I know it's been kind of a hot button issue. I mean, I'm all for safety, but the potential for abuse, I think, may lie there. So I just didn't know how supportive we wanted to be or where that discussion had occurred. Just maybe something we can.
Yeah, so we discussed this,
Yeah.
you know, prior to the meeting, and I referred to staff. They did remind me that these are statements directly out of the plan and some of the safety work that we've done. Again, you know, your concerns about, I'm gonna say, public privacy and abuse of the system. Again, those are always concerns, but we think that if programs are properly implemented with transparency and accountability and the right number of controls, that it could be an equitable program. And so I just leave it to the board to discuss how, you know, how far you want to go with that. But I think that's something that we, you know, talk about directly in the plan.
Yeah, the enactment of that type of legislation, as I've followed over the years too, has popped up every once in a while from individual members or from committees of the General Assembly, so that regardless if it's in our report, that has already surfaced in the past.
Yeah, and I didn't know how supportive or how we wanted to maybe phrase it. I mean, it's an issue definitely that exists and one that I'm not necessarily opposed to. It's just, do we as a agency want to be in support of it? That's where my question lies.
Yeah, and again, when we talk about what we support or what's in our plan, we're an agency that does it. That's our job to do that, to lay out possibilities or lay out ideas, et cetera, and in fact, make recommendations. But, you know, just like the gas tax thing, I think we got a little bit ahead of ourselves, I believe anyway, in getting caught up with the mayor's specific number of 30 cents a gallon. I don't think.
Which we didn't say.
I
We never said.
Joe, no, I'm not, you know, that was, but I was gonna go with 10 there, but I backed off because I was afraid that was gonna happen. That becomes the whole thing. The 30, everybody fixated on 30 cents. We definitely support not only that type of revenue, but other revenues, and I think as an agency to support those who are gonna make the final decision are what we're all about. Instead of getting into specific, you know, I want you to vote for, we have principles here, and we will support, as we do with the tollway, support, we need revenue.
Oh, and I totally agree, and that's where I think that conflict exists, because I think that we need to really focus on VMTs and getting, you know, that equitable revenue, and not so much on, you know, then potentially getting to privacy issues.
Specifics
So
about
that's,
putting a
you know,
speed
that-
camera in,
yeah, exactly. I guess that's
in
where I don't
Schaumburg,
want those
'cause
two
I
to
know he'd love
conflict
to
each
put
other
one in there.
and prohibit us from carrying out what should be like our main focus. I don't want that one to kind of
So if you would like for us to strengthen the accountability aspect of that statement, we can do that. We can incorporate some new language and run it past you and see if it fits.
And again, I believe in knowing the history of the General Assembly. Anybody that's gonna propose something like that, there'll be definitely 10 people behind them asking exactly what kind of accountability you're gonna have, et cetera, et cetera. So it starts to get down to the minutia of a bill, and I don't think, you know, we're gonna be in that position, other to understand that there's some principles or concepts out there, potentially, that they should take a look at, and if they take it up and do it, you know, they're kind of looking at our plan and following it a little bit. But yeah, we're not here to write bills, so. Any other questions, Gordon? Did you want me to support something that I don't think you have a motion here to support.
I
anything.
do not, not at this time. We'll come back to you with some modifications and, but I did also want to talk about, you know, just the communication that we've had with
Yes, please.
the transition teams. And so, as you know, the governor established about 9 subject matter transition committees to inform their new administration. And so we took steps to communicate some of our transportation principles to I can't remember exactly what the name is, but the infrastructure transition committee, but also to the director of the transition teams altogether. And so we've heard back from both saying thank you for that information, that they would be following up with us to have subsequent meetings. So I'll keep you informed of how that goes.
Yeah, I guess my only disappointment is that Nobody from this agency was appointed to one of those committees. I was a bit surprised by that, and it concerned me a little bit that their team is not paying attention or in tune with what we're doing here at CMAP, and I would think they would have. Joe, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
So, Mr. Chairman, we did make that request, and I talked with actually one of the co-chairmen of the entire transition. And of course, they're flooded with requests of those that want to sit in. And so we're fortunate that we have some good allies that are on there. As much as, I would have liked to have seen us personally represented, we do have some good allies, folks that we work with very closely, that we're in constant dialogue with. Not only have we provided them our materials, but I get feedback from them after the meeting. And so it's like we do have a voice at the table, even if we don't have the stature, of
Well, that's
being
what
at the
drives me
table.
crazy about transition teams, because I've been on one or two way back, and you're looking for substance here. You're not looking for, my name is on a committee. I mean, who's gonna bring what to the table? And there's no other agency in this state that can bring a lot to the table than this organization, and to not have a direct representative on there to let them know now and in the future, we're the go-to group to support many things.
And Mr. Chairman, again, I would offer that I think we're effectively engaged in the process, even though we don't have the stature of having our name associated with it. So,
No problem. Gordon, is that it? That's it. Thank you, sir. All right, our last item is a letter of credit. Joe, you want to explain it?
Actually,
Oh,
Angela
I'm
will
sorry.
take it. This is a requirement relative to our new lease on the old post office.
Yeah, I'll go through it fairly quickly. So today, I'm seeking board approval to allow the executive director or designated staff, Melissa or myself, to execute required documents for us to facilitate the completion of the lease of the old post office. I'll run you quickly through the 5 documents you have at your place. The first document is consent of board of directors, which would require the chairman's signature, and that would allow Joe the ability to negotiate and enter into a letter of credit with the landlord of the post office. The second document at your place is a certificate of deposit account disclosure, which would allow Joe to execute a document where we would purchase a $1.2 million CD that we're required to provide with the letter of credit. The third document is a certified resolutions for local government customers, and that document would actually be, signed by the chairman. It would grant Joe and I the authority just to manage the CD banking relationship with BMO Harris, who's the bank we're getting the letter of credit through. The fourth document is a collateral assignment of certificate of deposit. So one of the things we're required to do is use the CD as collateral, the certificate of deposit, as collateral for the letter of credit. So we need to execute that document. And the final document is a disbursement request and authorization, which would grant BMO the authority to draw against the letter of credit, and in worst case scenario, which I don't foresee, interest into a loan agreement if we went through the entire $1.2 million. So we need to execute these 5 documents in order to get the letter of credit issued to 601 West Companies, which is the landlord for the post office. So I'm seeking board approval.
Comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to kind of simplify all this, in essence, what this is our security deposit to sign the lease. It certainly is a much stricter requirement than what we had here at Willis Tower 15 years ago, but obviously, the fact that we went through the state shutdown, didn't pay rent here for whatever it was, 6 or 7 months. 2 months? It felt longer. Landlords now are taking a much stricter position with governmental agencies, and so, in essence, it's a security deposit. We would have it in a certificate of deposit. It would generate interest. In an ideal situation, it will never ever be tapped. But if we were ever put in the situation again to where the state had a shutdown and we weren't receiving our revenues, then the landlord could, in essence, tap that for payment of our rent.
Also, one other thing is this 1.2 million is only for 4 years, and then it starts to decrease.
So it's not for the entire
$100,000 a year
15-year
with the
period.
end deposit being 600,000. So it's not for the entire life of the lease.
Yeah, 4 years and then it starts vanishing and we get fluidity back with the money.
Any questions on that before I I'll entertain a motion that we accept the recommendation, 5 parts to the recommendation on the certificate of deposit. Again, any further questions? If not, all those in favor signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, vote no. The motion carries.
Was there
I'm sorry.
there wasn't a motion made.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I went like that and that.
That's fine.
Cheryl recognizes.
You did go like that and that, just.
Thank you.
The chair had recognized Rita Athos and Carolyn. Is a motion and a second.
Thank you.
All those in favor signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, a vote of no, and the motion carries. It's late. Okay, moving on. We are going to have to go in exec session after this, or we're going to have to close the meeting and go in exec session. So are there any comments from the public? Any? Oop, yes, sir.
Consulting work on intersection of farming. Your attention. Down to 20. Can be a really excellent resource to bring wetlands table. Also believe that bringing farming one for the challenge, the prioritized investment page here on one edge of the edge of suburbia. Here you have what looks like it's green space right over here. It's also an economy. It's an economy. Agricultural land production represents a land mass roughly 5 times the size of Chicago, which is pretty significant. So I just wanted to know that it's also, think about rural Illinois. It's actually, this is not rural Illinois, but on the outskirts of Collar County, the urban Chicago. And I think that any comprehensive urban and suburban reinvestment engage our farm sector, how to create basically build a market-based firewall to encourage the reinvestment. Bring towards attention. Staff, and the midst partners, especially I think with an opportunity with the 2050 plan, so long-term, an opportunity to get the environmental community more collaboratively with the farm sector. I wanted to bring that to your potential to
Picture tells 1,000 words, and that's why that picture was selected, so.
Thanks, Bob. And obviously, from 2040 to this plan too, this urban sprawl and the concepts and principles of this agency have always been the incorporation, sustainability of our region, which includes the farming aspect of it. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Likewise, sir.
My biggest concern is where I'm at in these planes. There's some drivers that are going in the wrong direction, and they really are not focusing on which way to go, because even though we have the sign that says no left turn, like when there's a one-way street, but they're still doing it anyway on the busiest section displays. Where I'm at right there is Graceland Avenue, displaying right by where the train tracks is by the place Metra. Some cars going the wrong way, and they have no idea it's a one-way street. They've been doing this on, and then also on Lee Street too, going south, and the cars going one way. It's a one-way street going north, because they're still doing it, and they have no idea it's a one-way street, so they're thinking of any way to dodge so they won't get hit. So it's like going on, and it's like trying to communicate with them, and it's just like they don't want to hear it. So we need better communication to tell them to make sure it's completely a one-way street, because if they don't understand what a one-way means, they just feel like want to go ahead and ignore it and wait for a crash to happen. So we need to collaborate with, to make sure to tell the general public who are driving to make sure it's completely a one-way street and it's never changed at all, and how to make sure that we won't have another accident again. Because they feel like they're gonna keep on doing this, and it will be like a walking time bomb, and we're trying to make sure that advocate to tell them that it's not gonna be a serious incident, because they're making a two-way street, so it won't be able to try to do this again, because they really don't understand it.
And this is in the,
Displays right
yeah,
there.
displays.
Yeah, because they're still doing it on and off, because like this past Monday, when I was on my way to displaying City Hall town meeting, there was one person going north on Graceland, and it was a one-way street going south, right by where the train tracks are, and the driver didn't know it was a one-way street.
Okay.
He had no idea of it, he or she had no idea, and they're still doing it.
So obviously a local jurisdictional issue, so we'll have to figure out the best way to get to the leadership of the Village of Des Plaines.
Yeah, and they're still doing it on Lee Street too, because
Okay.
I said to them, wrong way, and it's going the other way, and they really don't know.
Thanks. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will adjourn to go into exec session and come back out to close the meeting. So if you want to come back for that, you're welcome. If not, have a great day. I'll entertain a motion to go into exec session. Moved and seconded. I got that right. Right here, staying right here. All those in favor, signify by vote of aye. Aye. Opposed, vote no. Motion carries.
Go to the men's room. I will be outside until summoned.
We'll get right to it.